After more than 3 decades of estrangement and tension, China, Russia, members of the European Union, and the United States announced an historic agreement welcoming the Islamic Republic of Iran back into the community of nations, offering the open hand that President Obama promised in his 2008 presidential inauguration, and the ability to fully integrate into the global financial order. This agreement will be argued about in the coming weeks and months, both in the U.S. Congress and at the United Nations, and elsewhere. Critics of the deal believe that it fails to curtail the aggression and hegemonic ambitions that underlie Iran's development of a nuclear weapon, and indeed that this agreement actually makes the Iranian bomb more likely, not less. Advocates of this agreement, on the other hand, see it as the only way to gain reliable and comprehensive access to inspect Iran's nuclear activity, and believe that Iran's agreement to reduce its stockpile of nuclear material and promise not to advance its construction of a nuclear weapon will effectively contain Iran's nuclear program. Although Secretary of State John Kerry spent nearly 20 continuous days of negotiation, in intense negotiations leading up to this announcement, no one has been more single-mindedly focused on it than President Obama, who, from the beginning of his first term in office, has conducted his grand strategy of American foreign policy according to the goal of détente with Iran. Or, so argues Dr. Michael Doran, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute. Dr. Doran, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
In February of this year, you argued in Mosaic magazine that from the very beginning of his first term, and even before assuming office, President Obama's way of thinking about American foreign policy and the Middle East naturally, and if you followed to its logical conclusion, ineluctably leads to détente with Iran. All along, you wrote, President Obama has regarded his hoped-for comprehensive agreement with Iran as an urgent priority, and with rare exceptions, has consistently wrapped his approach to that priority in exceptional layers of secrecy. What is the argument for President Obama's approach, and why did it have to stay a secret until now?
Well, I think that he's done an exceptionally good job of making us believe that what he's trying to do is stop Iran from getting a nuclear bomb. But that all along he has seen the nuclear negotiations as a vehicle for a wider rapprochement with Iran. He's still making the same argument. People, I think, have caught on to the fact that there's something bigger going on here than just a nuclear arms control agreement. And they're also pointing out that the agreement is going to strengthen Iran in the region, and that he doesn't seem to be particularly disturbed by the fact that it's going to strengthen Iran in the region. And so he is insisting that it only be judged as an arms control agreement. But there is something much bigger going on here. And I think it goes back to his first decisions when he took office. In fact, even before he took office. I think the most important decision that the president made about the Middle East, he made when he was still campaigning, maybe even before he announced his campaign, and that was that the United States should pull back from the region. That it was, to use the words that the administration sometimes uses, overinvested in the region. The Iraq War was an historic mistake, he believed. Being tied up in military conflicts in the Middle East was a losing proposition by definition. He came into office with the intention of ending wars and not starting them. And what that means is that he rejected, not explicitly but implicitly, the traditional role that the United States has played in the region as the guarantor of regional order. And if the United States is going to pull back, then by definition it can no longer work as it has in previous decades to contain and roll back Iranian power. And if you're not going to do that, then the only other option is to try détente, to try to bring Iran into the international system, to try to turn it into a constructive partner for the United States. And that's the real goal of that's the strategic goal of this negotiation.
Well, to that point, Foreign Minister Zarif makes the case that the real strategic threat in the region is, of course, not Iran, but Sunni fundamentalism, represented most prominently by ISIS. According to this assessment, Iran and the United States actually share a strategic interest in combating a common enemy. They should in fact be working much more intimately, not less. according to this assessment, for Americans who actually care about repelling ISIS, why shouldn't they welcome that alliance in combating a common enemy?
I think the Obama administration and some of its supporters are pushing a similar line, or possibly actually believe that argument that Iran and the United States are natural allies, particularly with respect to struggle against ISIS. I think it's a complete misunderstanding of ISIS and of Iran and of the interests of the two, and of the effect that U.S.-Iranian cooperation has on the Sunni extremist phenomenon. So let's take them in order. The first one, Iranian and the interests of Iran and ISIS. ISIS is a Sunni revolutionary organization. It wants to overturn Sunni governments. It poses no threat to Iran inside Iran. It's not going to try to topple Iran because Iran is a Shiite country. There is something of a conflict between Iran and ISIS with respect to southern Iraq, with respect to Baghdad. There are points of friction where Iranian interests and ISIS interests clash significantly. But in general, the larger ambitions of Iran in the region and the ambitions of ISIS don't clash, and often they intersect. And it's been this way for a long time, even before there was ISIS. Right? The precursor to ISIS was Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And you may recall that Iran's close ally, Bashar al-Assad, streamed fighters to Sunni extremist fighters who would land in Damascus airport, and then the Assad regime would funnel them over to Iraq, because the Iranian alliance system, which includes Iran and Assad, benefited from the mayhem that Al-Qaeda in Iraq was carrying out and was creating. And I think the same is true today. Then secondly, Iran has benefited enormously from the rise of ISIS. Just among other things, it's allowed the United States and a lot of Europeans to make the claim that the real strategic threat is ISIS, and that Iran can help. And it's been able to sell this nuclear deal and the closer relations with Iran on the basis of this misreading of the strategic threat. Then lastly, there's the question of how the Sunni world, the Sunni states and Sunnis on the ground in Iraq and Syria, how they react to the closer relations between Iran and the United States. The United States today in Iraq is functioning as the air force of Shiite militias that are controlled by Tehran. And those Shiite militias are driving normal Sunnis, normal moderate Sunnis, into the arms of ISIS, not because they love ISIS, but because they face a horrible choice between near certain death at the hands of the Shiite militias, or life, but under an uncomfortable life under the extremist ISIS. And if that's the choice, then they're going to choose ISIS. The states of the region are making a similar choice. The United States is offering a regional order in which Iran is the dominant power, or one in which there are groups like ISIS that are carving out territory that is not controlled by Iran. If that's the choice, then they're going to turn a blind eye to ISIS.
So let's just get a couple of basic facts about the deal on the table. Describe to us the negotiating process, and what were America's goals coming into these negotiations?
I think, as I said, the key to understanding the negotiations from day one was that it was never seen as simply an arms control negotiation. That was never the strategic goal as the Obama administration saw it. The strategic goal always was to improve relations with Iran more generally. And that set up the fundamental dynamic of the negotiation, which was one in which the United States offered concessions at every stage. This process has been fueled by American concessions. And it started with the biggest and the greatest concession that the Obama administration gave. It gave in the very earliest stage, back in November 2013, when they came up with the interim agreement. The U.S. agreed to two things: that there would be an industrial-sized nuclear enrichment process in Iran, and that there would be a sunset clause to the agreement, that the restrictions on Iran's program would be limited in time. And then after that, the negotiation began. The negotiation was over. How long would the duration be, and how limited would the program be? Once we decided, though, that there's a sunset clause, we've basically said that at the end of it, Iran can do as it pleases.
Yesterday, President Obama remarked in a speech at the White House, quote, "This deal meets every single one of the bottom lines that we established when we achieved a framework earlier this spring. Every pathway," he went on to say, "to a nuclear weapon is cut off, and the inspection and transparency regime necessary to verify that objective will be put in place. Because of this deal, Iran will not produce a highly enriched uranium and weapons-grade plutonium that form the raw materials necessary for a nuclear bomb. Because of this deal, we will, for the first time, be in a position to verify all of these commitments. That means that this deal is not built on trust. It is built on verification. Inspectors will have 24/7 access to Iran's key nuclear facilities." As the president describes it, this deal is the answer to a very specific question. The question is Iran's nuclear program. So I have two questions for you. First, does it adequately address the nuclear program? And second, is that the right question?
No, it doesn't adequately address the nuclear question. And most of the statements that the president made about it simply aren't true. You started by saying it cuts off all pathways to the bomb. It's not true. It possibly cuts off those pathways, possibly, for a limited amount of time, for 10 years. After that, it does none of those things. So there has to be a belief, because of the sunset clause in the agreement, there has to be a belief that Iran is going to go through some kind of fundamental transformation over the next 10 years. That is the big bet at the heart of this agreement. And on what basis are we making this bet? What is it in Iran's behavior that makes us believe that by signing this agreement it is going to become more moderate? The only argument that I've seen the administration ever make as to why we should believe that there is some kind of moderating process at work in Iran is the fact that they sat down and negotiated with us over this agreement. But there are clearly two reasons why they did it. One, we had imposed crippling sanctions against them, and they're desperately eager to come out from under those sanctions, number one. And number two, we paid them to do it. We paid them $700 million a month to negotiate with us. And now we've dangled out, as a result of this agreement, they're going to collect between $100 and $150 billion in sanctions relief, in cash that's sitting in escrowed accounts right now, in the early months of this agreement. So they have a huge incentive in the form of this signing bonus to go along with the agreement. Plus, the agreement is going to lift all sanctions. Ultimately, is going to lift all sanctions. It's going to abolish all the Security Council resolutions under which the sanctions were imposed. It's going to lift the conventional arms embargo, and so on and so forth. I mean, the benefits that Iran is going to reap are enormous. In return for that, we get a curtailment of their nuclear program in the form of smaller stockpiles, so much smaller number of centrifuges, and a reconfiguration of the plutonium reactor at Iraq, as I said, for a limited amount of time.
But just to follow up, so is there evidence in the 159-page agreement that the negotiating goals of the whole process throughout have now been redefined in light of the deal that they actually reached?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, even in the last in the last stage, there are things that were announced after Lausanne, after the April 1 agreement, that the administration has reneged on. They claimed, after the Lausanne agreement, they claimed explicitly that there would be anytime, anywhere inspections. That is clearly no longer part of the deal. They claimed the fact sheet that they put out after Lausanne said that ballistic missiles sanctions would remain in place. The final agreement is lifting ballistic missiles sanctions.
Do they have incentives to see the deal through to the end?
Possibly some incentives, but because some of the lifting of sanctions is phased over time. There are some sanctions going to be lifted after 5 years, some will be lifted after 8 years, some after 10, and there's one restriction on stockpiles that lasts for 15 years. And they may calculate that staying within the agreement is going to work to their advantage, at least until some of those benchmarks are met. But we have to admit that we have front-loaded the deal with benefits, and that we are dismantling systematically the sanctions regime that has moderated their behavior up until now. So after they collect all of those benefits, they're going to become much stronger very quickly. They're going to become stronger economically, militarily, diplomatically. We can already see the rudiments of a Russian-Iranian military alliance that is developing. We are creating, by virtue of this deal, we are creating a powerful European economic lobby that is going to pressure European governments not to reimpose sanctions on Iran. So we're boxing ourselves in, and we are destroying the primary non-military tool that we have used to punish bad Iranian behavior in the past. So there's a fundamental asymmetry here. As Iran gets stronger, our leverage, our tools of leverage decrease exponentially. And so if I were the Iranians, given the mindset that they have, on the basis of the mindset that they have exhibited in the past, when they have never kept any past agreement, I would expect them to keep the agreement for 2 or 3 years and then to begin to cheat. They might be cheating. They might cheat from the very beginning, but they'll be careful in the beginning not to cheat so much that it could endanger them picking up the major spoils that they will inevitably collect.
Although President Obama has been so careful to define this negotiation and this agreement that emerged from it in terms of nuclear containment, having given up the leverage, as you describe it, and front-loading the benefits that Iran is destined to receive, what can people who care about human rights abuses in Iran and Iran's sponsorship of terrorism abroad hope for?
To me, I think it's inevitable that all of the bad behavior that we've seen from Iran is going to increase as a result of this deal. I could be wrong. Right? The president is making a bet. There's a bet. His fundamental bet at the center of this deal is that by pulling Iran into the international system, by flooding it with cash, by making it part of the international economic order, it will have an incentive to behave better, and it will see the benefits of good behavior. Like I say, I could be wrong, but if I'm wrong, it means all of Iranian behavior for the last 3 decades, all of Iranian rhetoric that we've heard during the deal, the behavior that we've seen in the region during these negotiations, where we've seen major interventions by Iran in a subversive way, not interventions through regular military, but through the use of the Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force, major interventions in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen. All of this has no bearing on how they're going to behave tomorrow. And I would just ask you, I mean, when in human history has somebody gotten a check for $100 billion and then said, I'm going to change my ways?
Well, let's move to what you see as possibly coming next. Does this agreement encourage or discourage pro-democracy movement inside Iran?
It discourages the pro-democracy movement because the regime is going to get stronger. The administration is selling us a fiction that the big winners in this are the moderates, that there's a kind of pragmatic business community that's going to get stronger. The fact of the matter is that the regime has set up a system whereby the Revolutionary Guard's economic interests are the ones that are going to benefit the greatest from these changes.
And as you see it, what kind of new resources does Syrian President al-Assad get from this deal?
Assad is the second biggest winner. The biggest winner from this deal is the Iranian regime. The second biggest winner is Bashar al-Assad. He's on the ropes right now. Whether the influx of cash that will come to him will be big enough to turn the tables on the opposition remains to be seen. But he's certainly going to get stronger, and you can just see it. Hezbollah is celebrating. Hezbollah and Assad are celebrating over this deal. The president was asked about that in a news conference, and he said, "Oh, they're spinning it as if they're benefiting it. They're not spinning it. All the vectors point in the same direction. America's allies in the region are traumatized and demoralized, and their enemies are celebrating. It's a very clear sign. The only group in the world that is looking at this and saying that this is good for the enemies of Iran, or that it's somehow neutral with respect to Iran's enemies, is the White House and its supporters.
At Tikvah, we have a special interest in one of America's traditional allies in the Middle East, the State of Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu has made his disapproval of this deal known. He's called it a mistake of historic proportions. What are the effects of the deal on the Jewish state? And how do you think Israel should respond?
I don't think that Israel is going to respond militarily in the sense that it's going to attack Iranian nuclear facilities. And I don't think that, because this deal is being hailed by the United States, by the European Union, as a historic opportunity for a new beginning with Iran. We're opening a new page of history, and so the political opposition to any action by Israel is going to be harsh, immediate, and I would say probably devastating to Israel. And I think the Prime Minister understands that. He doesn't really have a military option at this stage. I think he does have option of a greater cooperation with the other enemies of Iran in the region, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and so on, and I think we're seeing increased cooperation with them. How this will manifest itself and what practical policies remains to be seen. We might see greater coordination between them in Syria, possibly in Yemen. But the fact of the matter is that Israel's a small country, 8 million people. It doesn't have the ability to remake Syria. It can support some elements over others, but it doesn't have an expeditionary military like the United States. Saudi Arabia has limited resources for affecting it as well. But we'll see pushback from the Israelis and the Saudis and others against Iranian interests around the region, and at the same time implicitly against Obama's policy of support for Iran, which is what this deal is. I mean, the rhetoric says it's not support. This is, everyone in the region is correctly reading this as an American tilt in the direction of Iran. So we'll see pushback against that. But the fact of the matter is the Israelis are in and the Saudis are in a difficult circumstance.
In the coming days and weeks, this deal is likely to be very hotly debated in the United States Congress. In his speech yesterday, President Obama made very clear he intends to veto any disapproval of the deal. How do you see this playing out in Congress?
Well, I think that in Congress it's inevitable that the deal is going to be disapproved. The president will veto the disapproval, and then Congress will try to override the veto. That's going to be an uphill battle. We're going to have to wait and see whether Congress is going to have the power to override the veto. The fact that Hillary Clinton came out so early in support of the deal is a bad sign for those of us who would like to see Congress with enough votes to override the veto, because she's, from a Democratic point of view, I mean, all those votes that are going to line up for the president are going to be Democrats, almost with one or two possible exceptions. And if with Hillary Clinton, the presumptive Democratic nominee, if she had expressed doubt then Obama, as a lame duck, would find himself in a much different position politically. Some of the members of Congress would feel that Hillary Clinton gave them cover for opposing the deal. So it's going to be an uphill. It's going to be an uphill battle. We'll have to wait and see.
How do you see the debates in Congress affected by debates that will very soon, in the next day perhaps, begin in international organizations such as the United Nations Security Council?
Well, it looks like the president is trying to do an end run around Congress in the Security Council. The deal, the comprehensive deal, calls for prompt action in the Security Council to supersede all of the previous Security Council resolutions on Iran, and to begin the process of lifting sanctions. And so if the president gets the Security Council resolution in the coming days, he will have already started enacting the deal before Congress ever really gets a chance to debate it. That alone will be a very significant step.
Dr. Doran, back to that piece in Mosaic this past February. You wrote, "Détente with Iran will deliver disequilibrium, the exact opposite of President Obama's intended effect. By negotiating an arms control agreement, the president has shifted the tectonic plates of the Middle East order. And for tectonic plates, it takes a move of just inches to level whole cities. With this disequilibrium, as you call it, the prospect of real disorder in the Middle East, the likes of which we haven't seen in several years, if you were to advise the next president of the United States on January 2017, what would you tell him or her to do?"
The only way that the United States can organize the Middle East is by organizing the containment of Iran. And that's the essential prerequisite to taking care of the ISIS problem, to developing allies in the region who are capable of looking after our interests on the ground so that we don't have to send in the U.S. military. Any alternative, any effort to bring Iran into the region as a legitimate partner in creating regional order is going to fuel disorder, because the Iranians are still a revolutionary power. They're an anti-Western power. They're an anti-American power. They're an anti-Saudi power, and us embracing them and bringing them in doesn't mean that they change those goals. They pocket all of the concessions that we give them. They pocket all the benefits, and then they go on to the next target. And that's what we've done. We can't expect our allies, the Israelis and the Saudis, to sit back and take these blows without fighting back. So what we're going to see is horrible disequilibrium. In addition, the Saudis may well decide to go for a nuclear capability as well. They've signaled that they intend to do that. The administration is now telling us that that's not very likely, or at least the administration's surrogates are telling us that that's no longer likely, that the Saudis won't make that choice. But they're just saying that. They're just saying that in order to sell the deal. Nobody actually knows. We'll have to wait and see. If I were the Saudis, I would certainly do that.
Dr. Doran, thank you.
Thanks for having me.